I mean, I don't know about you, but I am sick of this. I'm sick of it. Can't he just behave like a normal human? I mean, honestly, like the president, 3D chess, shut up. Shut up about that. You don't threaten to wipe out an entire civilization. We're talking about civilians. His negotiation tactic is to kill an entire country full of civilians, men, women, and children. An American president so that the Strait of Hormuz will be opened. It's just wrong. He can't be a dignified, strong leader without threatening a bunch of war crimes.
Didn't he answer that question when he said the blood was coming out of all of your body? Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. Any homeowner will tell you this. Water damage is always worse than you think it is when the water is dripping out of your ceiling. Sure, that is horrifying, and what you can see is awful and traumatic. But it's the lasting stuff, the deeper stuff, the stuff under the surface, behind the drywall, down into the foundation, the mold, the smell, the rot. So often it is orders of magnitude worse. Should be easy enough for a former real estate developer to understand that theory. As a lion's share of Donald Trump's most high-profile political supporters are now in unprecedented fashion seeking to separate themselves not just from his policies and his unpopular war and his unpopular handling of the Epstein files, but from the man himself, from his character, from his whatever they think his moral fibers were made of before they turned on him. We'll show you first the latest from we showed you the first from former Fox anchor Megyn Kelly. But you have to understand, we watch this so you don't have to. And this isn't some sort of surface level flip-flop and damage you can just monitor by flipping through these things.
You got to say, the deal sounds very much like surrender on our part, which I'm in favor of. I mean, great. This needed to end. Ugly or any other way. It needed to end. It was folly to begin with. It was folly throughout. It remains folly. The young person coalition that Charlie Kirk delivered to the president is gone. They've abandoned Donald Trump. The working class, Piers. The latest poll that just came out showed he's 2 points underwater with the working class. That's been Trump's base from the beginning. They were the unshakable foundation that got him elected over and over. And they're gone. They're very angry.
In terms of political temperature checks, those sorts of comments are notable. So is the fact that Megyn Kelly has also joked in recent days that, quote, Trump could drop a nuke and she'd still vote Republican over Democrat. So there's that. But all the same, it highlights a degree of vast, unprecedented, not since he descended the golden escalator, daylight, not just between Trump and his media cheerleaders like Megyn Kelly, but now between Trump and, as Megyn Kelly points out, actual unshakable blocks of MAGA voters. The New York Times used AI to analyze more than 40,000 comments to Donald Trump posts on his own social media platform and reported to have engaged unease and anger bubbling up in that echo chamber, showing the depths of the discontent over the war. Quote, one user who indicated on their profile page that they supported President Trump 100% wrote that Trump had demonstrated a lust for blood. A Trump-loving conservative wrote that such threats would destroy the president's legacy. Quote, I'm honestly heartbroken, the user added. While social media sites tend to have a large number of bot accounts, the New York Times highlighted only examples showing no obvious signs of bot activity. Only a quarter of the comments were supportive, including posts praising Trump's backbone and asking him to finish the job. And all of that is just on the question of Iran, which has been going on for 40 days. Before that, there was the Epstein controversy, which Melania just brought back into the center ring. It is another issue over which MAGA and MAGA cheerleaders have expressed frustration with Donald Trump and his administration. But again, thanks to Melania Trump, for reasons about 2.5 hours since they happened, are still not clear. In case you missed those comments, Melania Trump, in head-scratching fashion, went to the podium after calling for the pool to assemble to discuss what she called smears having to do with her and Jeffrey Epstein, despite the fact that no one knows what those smears are. She also called on Congress to continue investigating the men in a matter her husband has repeatedly called a, quote, hoax. That's where we begin the hour with the president of Media Matters for America, Angelo Carusone. Also joining us, Charlie Sykes. He's the author of the newsletter To the Contrary, and Miles Taylor is still with us. Angelo, I'm dying to know what all of you think the Melania Trump statement was about, but on this larger portrait of what Megyn Kelly describes, what Ann Coulter describes in the last block conversation Miles and I just did, the things that figures on the left and in the mainstream media have been saying for 9 years now, that the corruption is out front and in front of everybody, that the violations of norms are now policy, that the conduct seems, to quote Marjorie Taylor Greene, quote, insane, and that no one can keep straight in satire or in straight political journalism which crisis is distracting from which.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, the effects of all of these are cumulative. I think that sometimes people are looking for a moment where they make this critique and then something suddenly changes. And as you noted in the intro, even though they are hitting Trump and they are criticizing Trump, they're still careful to say, but I would probably still vote for him, right? They're not willing to go that far. They're not, and that's okay for now. What's significant about this, though, the so what, is that because the effects are cumulative, it's not just that they are sort of wearing away, right? It started with policy critiques. That's where it's been for a while. And as you noted, it's starting to get more personal. They're starting to acknowledge that there's something at the core here that's wrong. There's issues of judgment. There's issue of character. That's all brand new, right? That's what happens when the effects are cumulative. So that's one piece. It starts to tear down the veneer. And for a figure like Trump, not himself, he relies a lot on kayfabe. He's a character. He's a character. That's why he gets away with so much, because he's a character in this larger story, which means he's a media creature. So not only if you tear away and you start to strip away at some of that storyline, it makes it harder for people to carry water for him. But when they are critiquing him, even if they're not willing to go so far to say they would change their vote, they're not carrying water. They're not unified. They're not telling his story, which means he doesn't have narrative dominance. So as bad as everything is, it could be a heck of a lot worse if the right wing was all in lockstep behind him, backfilling and reinforcing every single claim that he went out there and made. And so when you look ahead to the significance of it, yeah, he's going to make some real plays on the election, it seems like. He's going to try to attack it and undermine it. But if the entire apparatus that he's assuming is going to help backfill it and reinforce that isn't willing to do that in lockstep, it makes his position and the cards that he plays a lot weaker. And again, it's going to take time, bit by bit, as they chip away. I'll just give one piece of caution, though, because as they are criticizing Trump, it's worth going back to what took place in October, that fight with Nick Fuentes and the Heritage Foundation that embroiled much of the right wing. What they were dealing with was where the new power was emerging, and that's in Groypers. And the undercurrent of a lot of these critiques about Trump, they're as much about Trump as they are about channeling and organizing that new Groyper phenomenon that is increasingly gaining traction and kinetic energy within the larger Republican base. And so they're tapping into that because that's a growth opportunity for them. And I don't think it's an accident that it's all new media figures on the right that are beginning to make these claims. It's as much about what they believe as it is about how they grow their own respective businesses and audiences. And so there's a little bit brewing here that's percolating that could be a lot scarier and darker on the other side of this.
You know, this is year 10, Charlie Sykes, of every Trump story having something darker behind mystery door 2, right? And this was the story. I was looking through some old encrypted messages on my phone from Republicans during the first term, sending laudatory comments about things that happened on my program. But then when microphones were in their faces saying, I'm riding with Donald Trump. The reason we are where we are is because instead of honest coverage about what sort of chicken shit conduct those Republicans carried out by saying one thing in private encrypted messages and another in front of cameras so that Donald Trump wouldn't primary them, that's how we got to the insurrection. And that's how we got to a Justice Department that judges basically described as not conducting itself in normal order. I mean, the crisis is here. because people said one thing privately. No one has ever been caught on a hot mic saying something nicer about Donald Trump than they say publicly. Everything that has ever been reported by a journalist, caught on a hot mic, reported from a green room, heard on a train, heard on a plane, said in Davos, said to a family member, reported by a relative, reported from a staffer, is always that he is bat bleep crazy. Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying out loud stuff I've heard for 9 years about Donald Trump. So I understand that what is next is darker and worse, but it always has been, and that's why we're here. And I wonder what you make of this moment.
Well, we've reached a moment where Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying that Donald Trump is too insane for her. So think about that. I mean, if only these people had been warned, which they had been, over and over again. Look, Nicole, that I have resisted any irrational exuberance about the crack up of MAGA, because MAGA is more like a cult than it is like a political party. And we've seen this, again and again. We saw it after January 6th. But I will say that you're right when you describe what's happening now as unprecedented. There's always been that cognitive dissonance on the right, but now it feels like it's in Technicolor. And what's happening now that hasn't happened before is that this criticism is harsh, it is sharp, it is coming from the influencers, but also I really did find that New York Times deep dive very, very revealing, because the question is, will that ever trickle down to the base? The polls have suggested the MAGA base is still solidly behind Donald Trump. But Angelo is absolutely right. This is a drip, 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 bit by bit. They may not be breaking totally with Donald Trump, but there is hesitation, there is doubt, and that's kind of the midpoint that you want, that you would hope that people would be at. You at least break that sense of Donald Trump is always right. I can never criticize him, and it is interesting the way the war in Iran has broken this coalition.